being in that community for so long, how do you implement change without losing that secret sauce that made you successful, without losing the Ford brand when you came out with that new model?
That's an interesting question because a lot of a lot of that thought and that process is a debate I've had with my dad. He's kind of, to me, represents this old school, old fashioned way of doing pharmacy, and I stroll in, having worked in the pharmacy since I was 15, but with a lot of new ideas and new expectations for what it should look like and how we should behave and what we should be spending our time doing. So, I had to, as I was implementing those changes, I had to hear the rebuttal and the old-fashioned desire to keep certain aspects of what community pharmacy has always been and keep them intact. So that's always been a huge priority as we switch to Pioneer and as we've evolved kind of our workflow over the years to make sure we maintain that in the process.
Yeah, so that's kind of the problem that I've seen in a lot of pharmacies is they say our patients don't want a change. They don't want to lose that connection. And I was actually in a pharmacy that had that mindset. And while I was there, somebody came up with the weekly planner pill box from the floor, and I was like, "Your patients want that. They're doing it themselves." They do want to be adherent to their medications. They do want the best way to take their medications because they know that's what's going to keep them out of the hospital. That's what's going to keep them healthy, but it's a struggle. So, how do you maintain that balance? One thing with MedSync is that a good MedSync program has a lot of communication, like maybe even more meaningful communication than just that every now and then, wave over the counter.
Right. And I think that's how our communication has evolved and adapted, is that we have a lot more of that type of specific communication, that meaningful communication. In transitioning someone from non-sync to sync status, the handoff has to enumerate that. You have to really, in my opinion, explain to the patient that we're gaining time in communication with you whenever we synchronize you. And that's really tough to prove to yourself, I think, when you're starting synchronization. Am I gaining more time? And you really aren't up front. Those first handful of patients, a lot of times you're thinking this is just a lot more work. But you have to see the value in it. You have to be able to commit to it. And you have to give it that time to really see, what, this is where it's heading. This is where we need to be. And there really is value for the patient here.
Yeah, and there's a percentage where the scale tips, where initially if you have a handful of patients, yeah, it is more work. It's a new process. But once you have that economy of scale where you have the same process, it's not new anymore, it's when you really start to open things up. So during those first steps, when your team is kind of looking at you like, man, this new guy coming in here with his med sync and his rock music, is he, this looks like more work for me. Like, how do you get your team on board with a process that, can seem, on the surface, if you're reluctant, it can seem like you're doing this in more of a like closed shop kind of way that's less personal. So how did you kind of counter that with your team?
Well, the first thing is I had to sell out to it myself. I couldn't be fickle on how I felt about it. And so me and another new pharmacist, we kind of took it on that we're going to figure this out. We're going to take a sample of patients and do it for a few months with them and just kind of follow the process, see what, nuances to it weren't readily visible that we needed to kind of come up with answers for, and have those questions addressed before we just jumped head in and dealt with them as a whole company or a whole pharmacy. So, getting that first couple months and figuring it out myself with this other pharmacist, it allowed me to have the buy-in for myself, to be able to then take those case studies to other staff, other pharmacists, and say, this is where this patient was. This is how many times they came in throughout the month. This is how many phone conversations we had with them. This is how confusing their profile was before. And this is where they are now. And isn't this easier now that we manage them this way, not only for us, but really more so for the patient? They only have that one trip in here to pick up 10 medications a month. And I could go on with the benefits of it for probably too long, but I think establishing that vetting process for myself first was most important. Then it allowed me to take it and scale it and go, what is it going to take to get buy-in from the rest of the staff? And how do I implement that? And how do we measure that? And measuring it has been, I would say, key to the growth in our MedSync program throughout the last few years.
Thanks for listening to this clip from Beyond the Scripts, presented by the Catalyst Pharmacy Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please support our channel by liking, subscribing, and clicking the notification bell so that you'll be notified anytime we post new content. To stay up to date with all of the latest independent pharmacy news and content, follow Pioneer RX on your preferred social media platform.